As I said, my name is Madhu Krishnan from the University of Bristol, where I'm professor of African World and Comparative Literatures. Along with my colleagues Ruth Bush and Georgina Collins, for the last few years, we have been working with the Cameroonian literary collective Bakwa on a range of events around literary translation, literary production, creative writing. I've also been very fortunate to be working with Doreen Baingana, who has just left the Zoom room. Well, I'll continue with the introductions. A Ugandan writer, and more importantly, founder of Mawazo Africa Writing Institute, which I'll tell you all about in just a minute. With Doreen, we've been working again on creative writing workshops, but more specifically recently, turning our attention to the questions of infrastructure for literary production on the African continent and literary editing. So Doreen Baingana, who will be our chair today and will hopefully be coming back to the Zoom room fairly shortly, is coming to us from Uganda. As you can imagine, we are, as we've all grown used to over the last 18 months, dealing with various technical issues and just doing our best. So do bear with us when there are blips and things don't go well. We're all just doing our best, as I'm sure you are. Doreen is a Ugandan writer, editor, and literary arts manager. Her short story collection, Tropical Fish, won a Grace Paley Prize for short fiction. It also won a Commonwealth Prize. She's been shortlisted for the Caine Prize 3 times, including this June for her short story Lucky, which was published in Ubua Journal. Her other awards include a prestigious Miles Moreland Scholarship and a Rockefeller Bellagio residency. She has won 2 Tabere Arts Foundation playwrights residencies. She has also published 2 children's books, as well as stories and essays in numerous international journals. She co-founded and runs the Mawazo Africa Writing Institute, which is based in Entebbe, and which seeks to fill a gap in the literary infrastructure of the African continent by providing a space for craft learning and sharing, but specifically focused on long form writing, so the book, as opposed to short stories. In today's event, which if Doreen comes back, she'll be chairing, otherwise you probably are going to hear a bit more from me, we will be talking about literary editing. And this comes on the back of a new collaboration between Mawazo Africa Writing Institute and the Rwanda-based Huza Press, which is looking to produce a new series of fiction, book-length fiction by African writers. In today's session, we will be thinking about what is literary editing? How do editors work? What are the politics of editing African writing? We'll be bringing together 2 editors from Bakwa Books and Doreen, of course, to discuss these questions. We'll be comparing different approaches to editing, literary writing, and professional experiences. And we're super lucky that today, the piece that we'll be looking at for this particular slam, the piece of editing, is in fact an excerpt from a forthcoming novel that will be published as the first edition of the Mawazo Huza collaboration by the Ugandan writer Doreen Anyango. So I'm going to turn over to Doreen now, who will be chairing this editing slam. I would like to say, if you have questions or comments, there are 2 ways that you can do this throughout the course of the slam. There is, if you look at the bottom of your screen, a Q&A button that you can press, or you can pose a question to the panelists that will be answered and gotten to. You can also use the chat function, hopefully, to send a message either to all panelists or to all panelists and attendees. And I would warmly welcome you, if you are able to use the chat function to all panelists and attendees to say hello, to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, who you are, where you're from, but don't feel pressured to do so. So I will now be disappearing and Doreen will take you over in her very capable hands. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madhu. I hope you can all hear me. You can? Yes, okay. My internet went off, so I missed most of Madhu's introduction, but I'm glad to be here. I was really honored to be invited by Madhu and Ruth, who I have worked with on a number of projects with Mawazo Africa Writing Institute and myself as a writer. So I was excited to be invited to this because I feel sometimes editing takes the back seat and is not given that much attention. And it's mostly the writing that gets a lot of the attention in the literary circle. So this is a chance to put editors at the forefront, or writers with their editors caps on. I think this is a very innovative thing we are doing right now, where we can actually see the editors, how they've worked, see their work, and not just discuss editing in the abstract, but actually have them compare one piece of writing. Thanks to Doreen Anyango again. I hope she's here with us today, who had volunteered her piece. It's not easy to see your work being torn apart in front of an audience, and but bear with us. First of all, I just want to say, and before I invite Nfor to come in, and after, as Madhu has said, I hope after each of the writers, Nfor and
Dzekashu,
talk about what they did in terms of the editing the short piece, we're going to have a discussion among the three of us about that piece and editing on more general terms, and then open it up to a question and answer if the audience has any questions. So I think we should jump right in. I'll just put a note for those who speak Ruchiga or Dabachiga, is that there was something wrong with my word. So all the vernacular came out in one long word. So of course, the two editors from Cameroon did not know that those words were supposed to be separated. So just that, Doreen, sorry about that. So I'm going to hand over to Nfor. Please, could you talk a little bit about your editing decisions on that piece? I believe we are going to see it up on the screen. Ruth is going to help us with that. There we go. Over to you, Nfor.
Okay, I guess you're on screen. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So I guess everything I did is basically on screen. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So so basically what I did with the story, which is, I must say, a well-written story. It's not, how do I say this? It's a well-written story in any case. It didn't require as much as work as we usually get to do sometimes on text in Bakwa. But as you notice, most of my edits are actually comments, which is basically my way of going around editing. Generally, I prefer it to be a conversation between, firstly, the editors, because we actually have a conversation between ourselves before we even go back to the writers. So you will notice a lot of comments, which are generally geared towards maybe improving the text or highlighting stuff that may bring the author to review or change their decisions. I don't know if you'd like me to go into the specific cases or if that presentation is good enough for you.
Okay, that would be enough. Maybe if you're comfortable with that, that's okay. And as we start the discussion, I might ask about specific areas and specific comments.
Okay. That's
fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dzekashu, would you like to go ahead and talk a little bit about your editing, this piece?
Sure. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So it's a really interesting text and well written. Like it's obvious the writer has such a command of the English language, and my work as an editor is to bring out the best possible, the best possible outcome in the work, while trying as much as possible to understand the writer's vision and what the writer is trying to do. And it's very much around not trying to take the work in a different direction, but like really trying to understand what the writer is doing and bring out the best in that direction. And a lot of my edits are mostly structural edits. They aren't really what I would call political edits here, but yeah, it's mostly structural edits. And as the editorial process goes, it's usually a back and forth, which takes quite a number of exchanges with the writer, because it's about mostly finding the middle ground between what the writer and the editor is comfortable with. And Yeah, I guess that's it. The edits are kind of self-explanatory, and as you can see on the screen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excuse me, Doreen.
Yes.
Okay, now that Dzekashu mentions politics in the whole thing, there is obviously one decision that you notice in mine that's quite political, which is very much linked to how Bakwa chooses to work with languages and African languages, whatever language you have. You notice that the text that's in a local, an African language, that not in English, are not italicized.
Yes.
Yes, which is very intentional. It's actually part of when we do edits for Bakwa. I would say this was middle ground between doing something for Bakwa and doing something for the general public, because not every choice here, like the quotes, for example, are something that I maintain, because depending on the audience, I saw it felt like the author was going for, I think, American English. So the choice of the quotes were left that way, but in Bakwa, we don't use single quotes, we use double quotes, for example. But italics, as I mentioned, are something that we are very keen on, because italics tend to introduce a certain difference between the main language you're using and the other language that comes in. So you're like authoring and making it feel like it's a secondary language or something. Whereas like someone mentioned a few days ago, if you're speaking, when you switch, when you do some code switching, you don't actually, italicize when you're speaking. So when you're writing, putting it in italics actually like makes it sound like the person, this is different actually. When in speaking, you wouldn't actually highlight anything like that. People just hear it as a different language, and we don't italicize languages in Bakwa, be they different or anything like that.
Nfor, thank you for that point. You brought out a really important point that we're going to discuss in more detail. Apologies to the two editors and to everybody. When my internet went off, I got a bit flustered and I did not introduce the two editors properly. I'm going to do that now. Apologies. Nfor Njinyoh, I hope I pronounced your name properly.
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Is a French-English translator with a BA combined honors in English and French and an MA in translation. He is also, that's interesting, I think we'd like to talk a little bit about the translation, even though there was I'll bring up that issue later. He is also a copy editor at Bakwa magazine and Bakwa books, and an infrequent author of poetry. And Dzekashu Macviban is the founder of Bakwa Books and Bakwa Magazine. His fiction has appeared in Wasafiri, Kwani, Jungle Gym, and his writing has been translated into Japanese, German, French, and Spanish. He is the recipient of an Academy Schloss Solitude Fellowship. Okay, I've introduced you both properly. And I must say I'm an admirer of Bakwa, the magazine. I tried to get published and did not so far. But I think it's really one of the the forums or the portals that is changing and contributing a lot to the African literary landscape. You're really doing good work. So everybody take a look at Bakwa after this. Okay, I'm going to jump right into the issue you raised about whether to italicize or not italicize secondary languages, definitely, generally speaking, how to deal with another language in the text, because most African writers, almost all African writers, have characters who are actually speaking another language, even when the text is in English, they're speaking a mix.
Yeah.
So do both of you, so it seems you do not agree on this point. In the Nfor says you think it should be italicized. Dzekashu, no? Go ahead, I saw your hand.
Okay, all right, thank you, Doreen. So we actually agree on this point 100%. And so now I would like to point out something that I may not have pointed out in the beginning. So the way I approached editing this text is actually midway between working with Bakwa style guide and working with a much more open style guide. So definitely, according to the Bakwa style guide, we do not italicize words in foreign languages, in pidgins, in creoles. We do not italicize them because we feel it kind of shows it kind of sets it apart in the text. It makes it different. Whereas if, say, for example, it were happening in a local context, in the conversation, the conversation would flow and everybody would understand it, and technically no part of the text would stand out. So that is the kind of logic that we have at Bakwa. And so the reason why I did not italicize it was because I was trying to very much use an approach which is midway Bakwa style guide and midway another style guide, because like the Bakwa style guide is a whole other conversation by itself. But like, yeah, we definitely agree on it 100%.
And I can actually say that it was the same for me, because not every edition I actually made here was basically based off the Bakwa style guide. Like I said, the style guide would have us use double quotes for speech and not a single quotes as it was used in the text. But I also used halfway because I felt it could actually bring up conversations about different choices with different publishers. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to bring that. Ruth, I'm going to share my screen. I feel as if I need to get a little bit closer to, or you can bring it closer to where there's a sentence in Ruchiga. Let me see if I can do it. Let me see if I can do it. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, did you understand the vernacular, the Ruchiga? Let me stop calling it vernacular, I'm so colonized. Did you understand the Ruchiga?
No, but I did use Google Translate on it, although I wasn't very, I mean, Google Translate is not very trustworthy, but so the way in which we approach these things, that definitely we always have a native speaker have a look at it, but in this particular case, it wasn't possible due to a number of reasons, mostly due to time.
Okay. Okay, let me push back on that a little bit, just in terms of showing the italics, because maybe I'm a little old school. You say you don't want one particular language to stand out. What if it actually makes the text more interesting to the reader, to show that there's actually another language going on? This is not happening in English, even though the book is written in English. How do you highlight that fact? Not just that there is the italics, but that there's actually different cultures going on the page.
Well, I think personally, it's quite obvious. If you're reading and you see an I don't know if that's how it's pronounced.
Sorry,
it's obviously not English.
This was supposed to be, sorry, it was a...
Yes. Okumuendo. Yeah. So if you read that, obviously it's not English. You don't need italics to tell you that this is not English being spoken here. So personally, yes, you don't need italics. Yeah. And you will see that there's also a use of italics where it's more for emphasis, actually. If you notice, there's a part of them in the text where the main character, I think that's Kalisa, where Kalisa mentions that they were supposed to be, they now share, we now have a responsibility of a child. Then later on, she's like, there is no we any longer. So, yes, I use italics there for emphasis, like there is no we any longer, and then he has a responsibility. So that's actually what italics serve, what I use italics for to show that what's the emphasis actually. I believe italics for language, a word in English is obviously going to be a word in English, and you see a word that's not in English, you know that this word is not in English.
Okay. Anyway, definitely the trend has changed, because earlier on it seems more and more of the publishing, the more open-minded publishing companies are now agree with you that languages don't have to be italicized or not. I still, maybe it's just because of what I've been used to reading for so many years, but anyway.
Yeah.
Now, in
So
terms of,
can I quickly just add something on that?
Sure.
Okay, so back to the italics, there definitely are different ways of looking at it, but the reason why we say it kind of makes it kind of shows a difference in the text and makes the non-English text stand out is because statistically it's also mostly used by Western publishers for publishers for Western audiences to actually show that this is not the English language as they know it. Whereas if for example, take all these other, because first of all, there's so many different Englishes, and if for example somebody were to write in Pidgin, I wouldn't see a need why it should be italicized, because these languages keep evolving and these languages are perfectly understood by the audiences they are written for. So I really don't, this is one of the main reasons why I don't think any particular part of it should be italicized, because it definitely it shows its difference, but I think it should be allowed to flow like every other part of the conversation or the text.
Okay. That, I mean, this is one topic that could be a whole, semester just discussing this particular issue, because a really interesting one. What about the actual translation of for a language text that's in another language? Both of you didn't suggest that perhaps. In what ways would you normally do it so that the reader who doesn't know that language still understands? Because there are varying degrees of, there are varying ways in which that some people just do direct translation. Others, what do you prefer? Either of you.
I would say translations in a text would actually make it kind of heavy for a text that's written in English, and even glossing or any of that stuff. So there is this, I think there is this weight or responsibility that's placed on provincial, if I may call them that, provincial writers to actually explain why or what they are writing, to actually explain what, you don't owe it to anybody. You don't owe it to anybody. Anybody who doesn't understand the language, it's an assignment. Like in our translation workshops, what Rush Swartz says is the audience is not stupid, and you can't chew everything for them. Like if you're reading something and you don't get to discover what it's all about, then what's the point of reading something anyway? So I leave it that way. It intrigues the audience. They may want to go and find out what language is this, what is being said. It takes you away from just your holding your book and being glued to it, and get you to discover more than just what's written on the page. That's what I think.
Okay, so a translator, you said a translator doesn't have to. There was a very nice quote you had said. I wanted you to repeat.
Oh, is it what about
the reader is not stupid.
Is not stupid. Yes.
Yeah. You trust your reader.
Yes, you trust your reader to be adventurous enough. Picking up a book is already an adventure. Someone who wants to discover. You trust them to be adventurous enough to go beyond what's written on the page and want to discover, okay, I didn't get this. What's this about? And go and do the research for it. Simply.
Yeah. There's always that fine line between coming from a culture, not a fine line, but the cultures that have been othered, like you said, that feel that they always have to explain themselves, or your work of literature is a representational text saying, this is who we are, rather than a conversation within a culture about a particular, lived experience. And it's interesting that an editor has a role to sort of mediate between those two extremes. But at the same time, you don't want to have a piece of text that is completely opaque or obscure, or is that okay too? There's always a balance, right?
Yes, it's a balance. I would say having 3 sentences in another language wouldn't make a text obscure. Like,
Okay, you're right.
Yeah, so to also add a little bit to what For has said, a lot of these decisions are also made with a specific target audience in mind. And our primary target audience is an African audience. So I'm very sure a publisher with a different target audience would make very different kinds of decisions based on their audiences. So like audience is also very crucial in terms of these decisions. And we very much trust our audience. They're not stupid at all.
Very good point. Very good point. And I think the more work they're made to do, the more difficult the text is, the more it's enjoyable in a sense, in terms of the more you invest in it, because you're doing work. You know, you're really getting engaged with it. Okay, I'll move on a little bit to something you said about how before you said your editing style is more conversational. I think, Dzekashu, you said that too.
Yes.
And so before you prefer not to use track changes at all?
No, I use track changes.
Oh, I just didn't see them.
Yes, I use track changes. So for the
maybe
changes
you had accepted the changes.
No, I don't think so. Probably they weren't.
Because here I didn't say, for example, when you talked about the chirping of the birds, and
Yes.
I didn't see that. And then on the other hand,
Dzekashu.
Yours seemed to be very, very light. You did a very light touch, which almost seemed to me closer to proofreading. I'm trying to scroll quickly to yours, which was closer to, it seemed to me, proofreading than editing. There were no comments at all. And your changes seem to be mostly grammatical changes. So I'm really, I'm really interested in the different approaches. Is it because there are different stages of editing that you are working at, if that's a correct word?
Yes, you're very right. So more often than not, I work on a book at 2 stages. So I work on it at the level of conceptual editing and at the level of either structural or proofing. And this is very evident in the way in which I approach the text. Like I like to be involved in a text from the very beginning when the story is actually taking shape, and then at the end of the text when everything is coming together. And for the copy editing, I usually let other people handle that.
Okay, so you felt this text was at the level of copy editing. You didn't feel that it is still at that earlier stage.
It also depends on the way you look at the text. There's definitely more I can do with the text. But like I said, it's also very much back and forth. So in the first instance, I'm very much interested in the way in which the author would receive these edits before I can go to the next stage, because I never just edit a text one time. It's also back and forth. So based on the way the author receives it or the author's comments, I then propose another set of edits.
Okay.
Okay.
That's interesting. I feel especially since I'm a writer and an editor, that I want to, as I'm trying to see how much editing I do at what stage, I don't become a co-writer. So when you're in that really close engagement with the back and forth, at what point do you feel that I'm actually writing this piece with the author, or I'm stepping back and just helping the author? Because there's this famous saying that editors are failed writers. So we want to write, I think we want to, since we can't do it ourselves, we want to rewrite other people's work. I wonder for what you think about that, because you had more specific comments. Your comments were more specific in terms of stylistic changes. And let me go back to yours.
I guess I can share my screen since the copy you have doesn't probably show the edits.
Okay, you share yours and you can, let me stop my share and you can share yours.
Okay, I don't know if you can see
Not yet.
Not yet.
Give me a second. Yeah. Yes. You see anything?
Not yet.
No.
It's funny.
Let
Okay.
me.
Oh, it says screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe we'll just go back to this in the interest of time.
Yes, in the interest of time.
Or
Yeah.
for if you
So-
email it to me or Ruth, we can also try to share from our screens.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So the edits too on this one were kind of particular. I did some things intentionally because, like we said, wanted to bring up conversations about editing process in general and how much time or how much involvement generally is, how much the conversations that actually come up in the editing process. So partly for some of the editors was to see how much the extent of involvement the author, I mean the editor, actually gets in. Like at what point does it become his story and not just the writer's story anymore? So you see that even then, it's true I didn't make a straightforward edit. Okay, is that the version show my edits? The one on the screen.
The one on the screen are your comments, and but it
Yes.
doesn't show the actual track changes. But that's I find we can discuss your comments. I find them interesting.
Yes. So yes, this now gets into the point where I try to talk about the choices, what the details in the choices. How far do you go? Where does it become rewriting and not just editing anymore?
Okay.
And then yes, but then it's still, like I said, I stay while it's you would notice that there are just comments. You will be rewriting if I was actually like getting into the text and then changing everything and like, okay, this shouldn't be this. Let this be this. Let this become this instead. But these are more like conversations with the author. They might see something they hadn't seen before. They might notice something that could improve on their text and stuff like that. So it's mostly comments and not so much into the editing. Let me try to send this copy here to Ruth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think compared to both of you, I am very heavy-handed. And Doreen Anyango will attest to this. I change people's script and then I do the track changes, not script, the text, and then I also make a lot of comments. But I like this one, for example, in this particular sentence, where let me see if I can highlight it. There are leaves like limbs reaching for the neck, and you suggested the word lunging would be a really good alliteration. I like that because that is, you suggested it without actually making the change, so you left it to, and in fact it's a very good change, I think, but you left it to the writer to decide whether to use it.
Indeed, because like Dzekashu mentioned, sometimes it's also about how the writer is going to take your edits. We have people who are very, very sensitive with their words, like they've chosen and they feel like you're actually encroaching and you're telling them they don't know how to use words. And sometimes using comments, for example, gives them the space like, okay, this sounds nice, I could use this, instead of being like, okay, he's imposing this on me. What does it mean? Does it mean my use of reach is not strong enough or something like that? You know. So it leaves a space for conversation between the back and forth, and it's the choice. The reaching is good, it's fine, but using launch, for example, would actually take the stuff to the next level, and it's up to the writer to see if they want to use it or not.
Yeah. It's about, I think, not maybe respect and let the author have his authority of for their work. I think it's because of how I learned to edit, and I'll ask you both how you learned to edit. It was through submitting lots of short stories, especially to the literary magazines in the United States, and they were, by the time you submit to these big magazines, some of them don't really have time for a conversation. They just, okay, in my experience, they just tell you what they think and you can accept or not accept, and then you have the conversation back and forth. Because by the time they even accept your story, you're so grateful. They change everything if you want. And I don't know, I never, there's definitely a hierarchy of power there, because you as a publisher or you, the editor, are working for the publisher, and the writer really wants to get published.
It's true. And I think there's this temptation to actually become a dictator and to say, okay, I'm publishing you, you should do the things, you should do it the way I want you to do it if you want to get published with me. But I guess with Bakwa, we are very much more into conversations and not imposition. And you notice that, yes, Dzekashu said it earlier, we try to see where the author is going with the story. And there are some things you may want to change, but the truth is you don't have the author's vision. You are not the author. And there's somewhere they want to get with their story. So I guess it gives more direction when you have more of a conversation. I see there's a lot of baby girl, and I'm wondering, why baby girl? Is there something I'm missing somewhere? And I actually ask the question, why not just baby simply? Why is there a reason? Is there a reason for this choice to specify the baby's gender? Why is it not just his baby and his baby girl, his baby girl, his baby girl? Is there a reason behind it? I could just say, no, take away the girl and just leave baby, but I have to find out. Maybe there's a particular reason why the author wants to use the baby girl instead of just baby, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. But which brings me back to initial question: how did both of you learn how to edit? How does one learn how to edit?
I guess it's mostly a self-taught thing. I think my earliest exposure to editing was when I had pieces accepted by magazines. That was like my earliest exposure to publishing. And as a writer, you have to learn how to edit your own work to make it as close as possible to the best possible version of the text in itself, because like all these magazines are so really competitive, and you have to learn how to make your text the best possible form. And that was for me, that was very much my introduction to editing, by being edited by other people, and then the rest of it I had to like learn along the way by myself.
Okay, and Nfor?
So if I have to think about it, probably my earliest experiences of editing were actually correcting my brothers at home, my siblings. Every time they actually spoke English, and I was like, no, that's not English. You say this and you don't say that, and stuff like that. But for this editing with Bakwa, I think this reminds me of the conversation I had with Georgina and Madu in Yaoundé a few weeks ago, how I got into editing. So it so happens that when Dzekashu launched Bakwa, I was basically, I don't know if I was there yet, but I think I was actually crashing at his place. So sometimes I would see him reading a piece that's going to go on the website, and I look and I'm like, wait, this thing, wouldn't it be better if it sounded like this? And this is how I get entrapped into becoming an editor for Bakwa. So Madu said, it would sound like he groomed me into becoming an editor. So from time to time, I became sort of, okay, I finished reading this, I'd like you to have a look. Then I'll have a look and I'll like, okay, is what I'm saying, is what I'm trying to do here, does it make sense? And she's like, yeah, wait, you've got a hang of this, you could actually do this. And then over the years, finally in 2013, that's when I actually joined Bakwa fully as an editor, a copy editor actually. So I would say it's a tradition, not the tradition, but it came from me reading a lot as a kid, and then always trying to correct stuff with my brothers, and then getting into close quarters with Dzekashu, and him encouraging me to actually do what he felt I had a knack for. Yeah, that's how I got into editing.
Oh, okay. Maybe that would be good advice for anyone in the audience who wants to get into it. I think as a writer, you have to know how to edit, but there are many editors who are not writers who are just as good editors. So interesting.
Indeed, I'm not a writer, so
you're also a writer. Okay.
Well, yeah, a wannabe writer. It's fine.
It's just being too modest.
Modesty. I thought it was women who are modest. I wanted to share my very first paragraph and we compare how I edited. Not that there is, obviously editing is an art. There's no correct way to do it. But I just raised some questions when I just compare with what I did. So I don't know if Ruth, do you think you could stop sharing and I try and share quickly?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Okay. Let's see if I can share mine and then we'll open it up to the audience. Where does it say share? Oops. Okay, share screen. Where is So like I said, I tend to be heavy-handed. And can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So first of all, there were the tense differences, and then I was particular about repetition of words. His beloved occurred many times, and then tightening. I remember the first time I did my MFA, there was always a question. The teacher would keep on saying, "Tighten it, tighten it." I didn't exhaust, and it was so vague. When someone says tighten, tighten how? But you know, had started to turn gray and had started to peel. And I don't know if your languages are the same. I know you are Bantu speaking, but this is actually where you use two verbs. Started to is direct translation. Because that's how we say it in our language. We say, when we are trying to use, I don't know what tense this is, continuous something, we use two verbs instead. A beautiful kiss. So there's always that another issue I want to bring up about the language that is behind the language, that is behind the English for most African writers. When the writer is not translating, she's writing in English, she speaks in English, she thinks in English, but she has another language that informs her English. So I noticed maybe this, had this stood out for you at all? Started to turn gray and started to peel?
So like, for example, in my case, there's some of these things that I noticed, and there is actually a question that, there's a question that I had at the back of my mind, and it was mostly about the voice, like who was narrating this story. And at some point I was really, I almost like requested a longer excerpt of the text to know more about the person who's narrating this part and the voice and the overall voice of the person, to see if these are actually maybe less tight versions of the text, or some idiosyncrasies which are very peculiar to the narrator. I was really curious about that.
Yeah, in fact, it was a big challenge to not have given you, perhaps we should have given you a synopsis of the whole novel, but it's a very big novel. So you had that challenge of just editing an excerpt without having a larger, bigger, more knowledge about the whole piece.
Yeah, it's true that it stood out for me too, like the way of speaking, but I couldn't also determine if it was a choice, a deliberate choice or not. So you would notice that all I changed in the text itself was the gray with the E back to the A actually. And then I left a comment. I was like, during formation was turning gray and the part on the tip of her nose that started peeling off. So not to use the had started to, but rather was turning gray, like her beautiful skin was turning gray and the part on the tip of her nose that started peeling off. Instead of using the heart,
Okay.
Good.
Good. I also felt this was another big one. I felt never to enthrall him again, and it had to do with the tone of the whole piece. Again, Doreen Anyango, forgive me. This is not a criticism, but I felt that the tone felt almost sentimental. Almost maudlin. It was tragic. The mother of his child had died, but the language seemed to be almost excessive in its emotion. But I knew this again was a question of the author's style. Do I then encourage the author to continue with this style? This is her stylistic choice, or do I, as an editor, come in and say, why not make it a bit less Is it me as a writer jumping in to then try to change her style and tone? Would that be, how would you deal with something like that in terms of the style and tone of the whole piece?
Like the first thing to do would always be to suggest an alternative which we think would work best. And if the writer is comfortable with, fine. If the writer is not comfortable with it, we also try to hear the rationale behind these choices that the writer has made, because it's very much about meeting the writer halfway rather than saying, this doesn't really work, maybe you should do it this way.
Yeah. Okay.
Same there. Yeah. And I think what's peculiar with Bakwa is that the conversations on the text usually happen, first of all, between, when we get to my level, it usually happens, first of all, between me and Dzekashu before we even go back to the author. So if there's something that I feel that jumps out and I talk to him and it's like, okay, this is okay or not, let's put this to the author. That's where we go to the author. But before we even get there, we have our conversation between us. Then we see, okay, where do we need the author to have an input? Where do they need to actually like stand, give us your opinion before we actually strike a balance and see where we're going. So it's finding out first where the author wants to go and seeing if their choice is actually go in that direction.
Okay, great. Yeah, you are all very. I love this idea of a conversation. I think it's really the way to do it. I think it's time to open it up to the audience. For all the people who have come in and joined us today, thank you very much for joining us. I should have thanked you earlier. I'm sure you've lots to do on a Saturday. Do you have any questions or comments?
Doreen, so there have been a couple of questions put into the chat. So I thought maybe I could ask on behalf of our audience members in the first instance. And yes. The first question was, could the panelists please say a little more about how the Bakwa style guide was developed? Was there a template it was based on or adapted from?
So this really long conversation that we had. And I think we had to look at so many different style guides, so many different templates, and also trying to find that balance between what works most naturally for Bakwa, because it's only maybe 2 years ago that we actually had what we call a style guide. But prior to that, there are certain kinds of ways, there's already an internal understanding about the way in which we approach editing. So when we actually developed the style guide 2 years ago, it was kind of a mix between looking at different style guides, different templates, but also making sure that it matches the body of work that we've had for the past 8 years. And we had a lot of disagreements, like a lot of disagreements on the style guide.
Yeah, like Dzekashu said, it's been a long time coming actually. So it's only about 2 years ago that we started formalizing the style guide in written form, such that probably some people could take over later. You never know. But actually, it was formed basically, firstly on experience. Like all the issues we came across while editing our first issues, our past issues, and the consensus we came to along the years. Then 2 years ago, we decided to try to formalize it such that if someone had to join the team, they would know where they would have a starting point. So.
I'm curious about one disagreement.
One disagreement. For what do we disagree over?
I think there was we had a major disagreement with the use of I think M dashes, and sometimes it also comes down to it also comes down to the really tiny choices. At one point we were like, okay, where do we use M dashes? And then at one point we were actually arguing over what comes before an M dash. Do we use a space and do we use a space after the M dash or not? Yeah. So we actually, these tiny details that don't seem like anything, but we spent whole days actually arguing about them. Like, okay, what comes in where exactly? So yeah, there was stuff like the M dash that we argued a lot about.
Yeah,
and another thing that also informed the style guide was also letting previous usage dictate the current style guide. Mm-hmm. But in some cases we had in cases where we had conflicting conflicting uses of style in the past, then we had to set a rule. But when there wasn't really a rule, we had to go with previous usage, previous editing models in the past issues of Bakwa magazine.
Okay.
So there's another question just before we go to the Q&A panel that was put in the chat quite a bit earlier, which was, how do you approach editing translations? Is there a difference?
Okay, I guess yes, there is a difference, because with stuff we've edited before, like with the bilingual anthology, and with a copy, I have that in my box, with a copy of Passion, our first anthology of Passion and Ink, which came out in English. Some of the stories in there are actually translated from French. So our approach to editing translation is slightly different. I think I would say mine is a bit more intrusive than with a story that's originally written in English, for example. So generally, it seems we are like the people who get to decide, or not to decide, to see the quality of the translation from scratch. Especially for our first anthology, it's more intrusive than editing a text that's written in English.
And I think a plus that we have is also our bilingualism. Especially yes, if we're editing text, say French to English or English to French, our bilingualism comes into play because we have to constantly look at the source text while looking at the edits to the text in the target language.
Yes, and the fact that the stories were actually written by Cameroonians also it's good for us, because we understand the context, we understand where the authors are coming from, and we can actually, even the translators are actually, now we're working with Cameroonian translators. On our first anthology, we weren't working with Cameroonian translators, so there was a lot that we had to get into details in any case, because having someone translate without knowing the realities on the ground, without knowing maybe terms or phrases that are actually peculiar to the Cameroonian context, we had a lot. In fact, we were more immersed in the editing. It was sometimes felt like we were almost retranslating, but that was because some of the translators weren't immersed in the culture. They didn't understand all of the nuances behind the use of words and everything. So editing translations for us, most of the time, it's more immersive, it's more intensive, it's more involving, and we're more engaged in it than when we're editing a text that's originally written in English.
That's interesting. I just want to talk about the translation. I was involved in a book that had been that had been translated from a book by a Rwandese author that had been written originally in French and was translated into English by an English professor. And I was asked to come in by the publisher, who's a press, to just do some editing so that the usual editing, but also to sort of make sure there's an African flavor to the language. I think exactly. That was my remit. Do you find when you're, of course, this is a common translation issue, translating into French, translating into English, and yet not translating into Cameroonian English or Cameroonian French? You know, there's all that, so many different languages happening within one language. Do you find that a challenge in your, or maybe that goes into the translation? That's too much into translation.
Yes, I find the challenge. Like I mentioned during our workshops, Bristol Translator just ended on Thursday. It's always a challenge. Like for a Cameroonian translator who's based in Cameroon, let's say for a Western translator, for example, translator from a Western country, they never think about audience. I think it comes automatically to them that they're translating for a particular audience, that their work is geared towards, for example, Americans, or towards English people, or towards French people. So it's never a second, in fact, never occurs to them that there's another audience that could be existing, like could exist outside of that. So they have a focus. Contrary to someone like me, I grew up in Cameroon. I learned English and French in Cameroon. I speak them from when I was a child. And it so happens that most of my initial translations weren't meant for Cameroonians. So that kind of changes my perspective. And at one point, I started working with translations that are meant for Cameroonians. And I end up in the spot where when I get a translation, I first have to think about it, like, okay, who's the target audience first? Am I translating this for Cameroonians first, for Africans first, or am I translating it for the world? So it's always a question that keeps popping up now. Initially, there was no question, but now it's a question, it's constant questioning in my mind. Who is going to read this? If I translate this the way Cameroonian would understand it and relate to it, would an American understand and relate to it? It's supposed to be English, right? It's English, but then would they relate to it at the same level? So that's an issue that comes up a lot. Like, who's your target audience?
Yeah. And the bigger issue or deeper issue of who are we writing for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, are we writing for the West or are we writing for ourselves? Madhu, are there more questions?
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, there are quite a few more questions. I should also say, for people not looking at the chat, we're currently having a heated debate about dashes, N dashes, M dashes, and how you translate these into French, which of course we would. So there's a question from the audience, which is, what is the difference between editing and proofreading?
Okay, who wants to answer that?
So I think we sort of answered it already, but I'll just like go at it again. So, I mean, depending on how you look at it, proofreading is part of editing, but editing is much more heavy in terms of how it approaches the text. So everything from restructuring the text, rewriting the text, making really, really heavy suggestions, all of which are all geared towards bringing out the best version of the text and hoping that the writer is going to like it. As whereas proofreading comes very much at the end, where all these negotiations between the editor and the writer have run their course, and there is like this going closer to a final manuscript, and proofreading is there to dot the I's and cut the T's and make sure that nothing was overlooked.
Yes, I kind of agree with that. It's generally most of the time end of process where every other detail has been looked into, and you have to make sure that nothing was missed actually in the whole editing process. And even when we talk about editing, I think all of these they exist on a spectrum, right? Where proofreading is part of editing in any case, but editing too is actually broken down. You have to choose, okay, what kind of editing are you doing? Is it developmental editing, for example, which is much more heavy-handed, where you're trying to like retouch the text, you're trying to give it more structure, you're trying to adjust it such that it gets the best shape, for example. But proofreading at one point is actually part of the editing process. When you're editing, even doing the developmental editing, you have to like check for the proofing. So the proofing that comes at the end is more like a quality assurance kind of check, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of questions that relate to each other, which are really about, you know, if you could give us examples or discuss how you would handle, and I think maybe all three of you can answer this, what would happen if you actually have a conflict in the editing process with an author? So what do you do if a writer is bent on keeping part of his or her or their work that you feel should absolutely be edited? Or, you know, have there been major clashes, and how do you deal with that?
Who wants to go first?
That's a really tricky one, but like I would say it also depends on the kind of clash. Is it I think it really depends on what we are disagreeing about. Is it grammar? Is it style? Is it something politically correct or incorrect? It depends on exactly what the disagreement is on. But in as much as the publisher always has the final word, we always want to make sure that the author is happy with whatever changes we're making.
And if I would like to add to that is that sometimes where a piece finally doesn't get published, and sometimes it's not because there was disagreements, especially at Bakwa, it's actually because the author was tired. Because it happens that some of the text we receive need so much developmental editing that at the end the author's like, I'm tired of this shit. Like, it's like, but people who like, during our launch in Yaoundé a few weeks ago, I told the authors who were present, like, if you've gone through the backward editing process and you've gotten published at Bakwa, you have the potential to actually withstand all kinds of pressure when it comes to writing. So sometimes people don't understand where you're trying to go with the work, and some of the young authors are not actually very patient, which means that they run out of steam very easily. They're happy when you select when you accept their piece and like, okay, we're going to go into the editing process. And when it comes to the process of actually editing it and you see how much work goes into it, some of them actually run away. Like, no, you know what? I'm giving up on this, which sometimes is sad. But then if someone is not ready to work on and improve on their craft, which is basically one of the missions of Bakwa, we were out there was a vacuum, and we're trying to get young people, especially, to write again, like to get into writing and to write good stories, not just write for writing's sake, but produce stories that we will be proud of. So the young people generally need much more editing than the older writers and the more established writers. And like I said, sometimes the story doesn't get published, not because it wasn't good, but because, for example, the author was tired of all the editing and the back and forth and decided to drop out. So there's stuff like that happens, not just conflicts, but impatience.
And it's an unfortunate reality. I would say for every book that we publish, especially anthologies that involve work with a number of writers, at least 3 of the writers usually just end up saying they're tired of the editing process.
Which is rather sad, because actually most of the real writing happens in the revision process. That is where the real writing works. So if the writer doesn't want to go through that process, then maybe they're not cut out for writing. Because
Exactly.
the first draft, the first draft never comes out perfect. Pardon?
Mm-hmm. I don't remember who said this, but they say writing is actually rewriting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember who said that.
Very true. Very, very true. I found this quote: "The first draft reveals the art, revision reveals the artist." So you actually have someone who is holding your hand or looking over your shoulder, helping you create your work of art. And if you don't want to do it, when I worked at Storymoja, we received so many manuscripts we would have liked to publish that if you don't want to do it, it's your loss. Because there are just so many that we're just, by the time we select yours, it's like almost a lottery ticket win. And I hope Storymoja won't say I'm not speaking on behalf of that publisher right now. With my own work, and what you said Nfor is so true, it is a great way to learn how to write. So a writer is really missing an opportunity. I learned a lot from all my various editors, because you ask them why this decision and they tell you why, and then you learn something new. So it's actually a very positive thing if an editor wants to actually engage with you, because there are many magazines that don't have that time, and they'll simply just reject your work if it needs a lot of editing. And it's getting more and more the trend where publishing houses want a book that is already finished and good to go, and they don't have time to actually do the work with you. So if you get an editor who does, I think you should be very, very grateful. So for me, if any writer doesn't want to do it, then I don't waste my time. But,
so what you've said, Doreen, leads to another audience question quite perfectly, which is about the economics of literary editing. And specifically, the specific question was, does Bakwa pay its editors? But I think perhaps all of the panelists could reflect on, editing is not hugely valued. So how do you assert the value, both economically and culturally, of editing in your practice?
Very good, a very good question. I was just quickly going to say that when I'm editing work for people who are paying me independently, I make the changes, I suggest the changes, they can take them or leave it, because it is they are paying me, and if they want to stop a certain stage, that's on them. But there's a larger question of the economics of editing, which I will turn to Dzekashu.
Dzekashu.
Yeah, My brain needs editing. Okay, go ahead.
So as a really small structure, definitely Bakwa works with a lot of editors and a lot of other people at different stages of book production. And yes, we definitely pay our editors. For example, we work a lot with Kelechi Njoku. He's a Nigerian editor, brilliant editor. Like his edits have been very instrumental to the overall feel of a lot of the work that you see that we publish. And for French editing, we've worked a lot with Florian Gimbis, Ray Deby, there are quite a number of people, but yeah, we definitely pay all the editors that we work with. Like we don't believe in free labor. And so usually what we do is that we have a quote for every range of words, and we usually just hope that the editor is fine with it.
Yeah, because obviously we're not that high on finance, so
Yes.
so but we try to make sure that what we offer the editors, at least it's not insulting pay actually.
Yeah.
So yes, something that's worth their while. It's not going to get you rich, but at least
Yeah. But don't you feel generally, at least on the continent, that the work of an editor is not valued in monetary terms, just because it's just so hard? Most of the publishing houses themselves are on a very small budget, but that we just we don't have the structures, I think, to really give proper value to the work of an editor. If the whole literary landscape was much stronger and much more developed, then the work of an editor would be as valued as much as it should be. Because when I think about the time it takes to edit, and if I was actually going to charge for me now as a freelance editor, exactly, if it takes me a month to edit a book, but what I charge someone is not enough for me to live on that one book, on the fee for that one book. So there's always that. It takes time. What do you think are the other challenges on the literary landscape in Africa in general? It's a very broad question, but from your experience, that either the challenges or the positives about sort of editing as a career.
I think a lot of it is mostly at the level of infrastructures. Like, and here I'm speaking about publishing in general. It's very much at the level of infrastructures. And with regards to editing, definitely there's so many brilliant publishers who don't have the means. And I'm sure that if they had the means, they would definitely pay a reasonable amount. But I think it's also, we're also getting into an interesting time where we have a lot of serious publishers who value the work of an editor and are willing to pay at least a decent amount. And the more publishers we have like this, I think the more closer we get to a sustainable industry, but we're still very far from that.
But I think, yeah, that is very true. And I know that at least here in Uganda, we have had AWT that has done a series of trainings of editing to sort of get more qualified editors. Do you find that apart from the brilliant one you talked about, you do have enough editors when you need them? Enough qualified editors?
Yeah, so there is always the issue of the quality of editors, but I think in our case, especially given that we've been in the publishing industry for the past 10 years, we very much know who to reach out for what kind of work. And I don't think I really have the problem of finding the right editor. It's always about, are we able to pay them for the work? So we always have to make sure that we're able to pay them. And that is what informs who we work with, actually.
Okay. Matthew, I don't know if we answered the question fully. Can you please repeat the question, or are there any other questions that may be in the chat?
I think that you have answered the question, actually, because it was about, what is the pay like for an editor? What's that like? And you definitely discussed that, but there was another question, which is for specifically, but I would also like to hear you, Doreen, respond to it, where Georgina would like to know for how your experience as a translator impacts how you edit. And I would like to know, Doreen, because you know you did the Mukasaba book, you did the Who's a Press book, Not My Time to Die, how you felt about editing a translation.
Okay.
Okay.
So Nfor, you can go first.
Okay, so I would say if there's anything if there's anything I can say about how my experience as a translator influences my editing, I'd say translation actually has this tendency of opening your mind, right? Like you discover fields like basically every other document you translate, like there's a lot of stuff you soak in. And actually that gets me into a mood where sometimes I don't need to go doing a lot of research to actually edit the work. Like you start editing, you're like, no, this doesn't sound right. I've come across this is the difference between aspirin and Advil or this and so other drug. So that experience of translating, of doing research as a translator and getting that knowledge from different parts of different fields actually affects positively my work as an editor. So I end up sometimes not doing a lot of research because probably I've already come across this while doing my translation and I know exactly what this is about and I don't need to research about it anymore. And so yeah, that.
Okay. Okay. In my case, it was a very interesting project. It's a very interesting project, editing a translation, because I'm really passionate about, I don't know if you've called it African English or Ugandan English, or in that case, the book was by a Rwandan writer, Not My Time to Die. I don't recall the title in French. And I thought it was really astute of the publisher to have got an editor, you know, an African editor, which is not to put down or put aside the work of translation. I'm very sure that translation was very, very good, but of course I don't speak French. I don't speak French, so I wasn't exactly sure. So I didn't have my hands on the original text. I didn't have my hands on the original text. I couldn't read my original text, basically. So I was very much aware that this was a sort of a one step removed. But the very good thing is that we kept on having these conversations where the translator would go back with my questions to the writer. So it became a bigger conversation about many other things. So it was really quite enjoyable. What I really enjoyed was I was able to sense the flavor of what seemed to be a more, maybe I should say, francophone type of sentence. Yeah. And then it was easier for me to think about how would a Ugandan or maybe a Rwandan say it. Now, of course, most likely the Rwandan might have said it with that francophone flavor. And of course, you know, now Rwanda is at a place where they are moving more to anglophone than francophone. So maybe the flavor I would give it in English is not necessarily, and I was aware of this, is not necessarily the way a Rwandan might have spoken English, depending on if the Rwandan is from, let's say, former Ugandan. It all brings in the politics, either a former Ugandan who would speak a more Ugandan English, or had grown up with the influence of French, in which case they would speak a more francophone English, if that makes sense. On bringing in the Chinyarwanda flavor, which Chinyarwanda is very, very close to my own mother tongue, Ruchiga, Runyankore. I really think Uganda and Rwanda are one country, but you know, politics. In fact, Africa should be one country. But anyway, so that was also informing me. But of course, I didn't know to what level the writer is informed by her Chinyarwanda, because you know, we are all at different levels with our local languages, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So it was always that play, and you can never know if you've got it 100% right. You know, just for example, the word Rwandan itself, I wanted to use the word Rwandese because she's writing about a period of time. It was based on the 1994 genocide. and always the reference was Rwandese, but because now politically they've moved to the word Rwandan to sort of move away from the, I hope I'm correct, I don't know if the translator is in the audience, from the more French flavor for political reasons of the identity. So now it's more common to say Rwandan, whereas before it was more common to say Rwandese. So just from one simple word has all sorts of connotations and implications. And then, but in the end, the final decision was made by the translator, because I would give my suggestions and then she would go back to the writer. And then in the end, because I'm just editing the translator, not editing the original. But it was, I learned so much from that process, just also, just how language is so rich, the texture of language. You could just see there's so many different ways to say things, intonation, and how much you can miss just by the slip of a sentence. I wish I could translate, but long answer, sorry.
So I think we've now managed to handle all of the audience questions. So maybe all the panelists just say a final word, and then I'll come back on with my video to thank everybody and close the session.
Okay, please go ahead, Nfor, with the final word, if you have one ready, or I don't know who's the boss of who.
Dzekashu is the boss.
There are no bosses here. There are no bosses here. Yeah, so like, I mean, like, yeah, so like, just to like kind of say, editing is not a dictatorial process. It's very much a process of communication and understanding where the writer is coming from and what the writer is trying to do. And at Bakwa, we very much respect everything that the writer is trying to do, and we try to make sure that the writer is happy, while at the same time also showing the writer that there are other ways of saying whatever they're trying to say, and better ways of just looking at the world. And yeah, hopefully many writers get to understand that, and hopefully also we get to do a lot more translation, because like we really want to do a lot more translations, and not just French, English, English, French, a lot of like African languages, Cameroonian languages, and really like, so like our philosophy around translation is very much centered around destroying the hierarchy of languages, because like some languages are very high on the pyramid and other languages are very low. So we try as much as possible to translate such that all these works, irrespective of the language, have the same kind of visibility. And yeah, that's it.
That's so true. Yeah, and Nfor?
Yeah, okay. Didn't know I had to say a last word, but okay, let me say I'd like to thank our partners for enabling this event to happen. Actually, this is I think this is my first time coming out like into the public as an editor, and this is kind of like probably the first event of this kind on our continent, and I'm very happy for the opportunity to actually see. It's true, I think it will have been maybe more I don't know, more how can I say this, more of a battle if we'd had editors from two different publishing houses, for example. We have enabled us to see the different philosophies. But I guess our choices in handling this text actually at least enabled us to have some of those issues come to the forefront, which we could discuss. So thank you very much to our partners, and thank you, Doreen, for your wonderful moderation of the conversation. And if there's anything I'd like to say is please buy Bakwa books.
Yep.
Please. Have books.
Support independent publishers.
Yes.
Support independent publishers.
Need your help. We actually put in a lot of work. So the question earlier about editing, payments of editors, honestly, between my day job and Bakwa, I don't even do freelance gigs. So it's basically just Bakwa and my day job. So we really need the support. We really need people who can come in and buy our books, because these books need to be read. Our stories need to go out there. And we are trying to put out those authentic stories, African stories, everyday life, and also existential issues like the everyday African of today faces. So please support indie publishers and buy our books. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, both. Let me not kill your names even more. Both are panelists. It's been a really interesting discussion. I wish we were in the room together and we could go on and on and on with some of these discussions. But of course, having it online also has made the audience larger than it would have been. So that's been really great. I believe you are Bantu speakers in Cameroon.
Yes.
Bantu?
Yes, ma'am.
I would love to see some of our work translated, or to have that conversation about the similarities and differences between some of our languages, and not always talk about French and English. Also, yeah, to have conversations more about African languages, which is also you know, it's sad that we don't have enough of that going on. And maybe this book will be translated into French when Doreen Anyango's book comes out. Speak with the publishers. I don't know if Kate is with us today. Thank you, Doreen Anyango, for letting your work, being a guinea pig for us to use your work. Thank you, you guys at Bristol, Madhu, Ruth. We have worked a lot together. I really do enjoy that. There's something else I wanted to say. This was supposed to be a slam. I wanted the competitive element, but these guys shied away so that the audience votes for a winner. But of course, you know, there's no real winner, as they always say. We are all winners, and you both gave us a flavor of your work. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and I will shut up.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for being such a great chair. Thank you to everybody for giving up time on a Saturday. It shouldn't be a working day. So it's just wonderful. I've thoroughly enjoyed every second of this conversation. I feel so blessed and highly favored that I get to count hanging out with people like you as part of my job. How could it possibly be any better? So yeah, thank you to our audience for coming. I hope you enjoyed our event. I hope you learned something about the very underpaid, undervalued art of literary editing, which is also so hard and so difficult and should be something that's at the foreground. Please do have a look. I put a link into the chat. We will be hosting a translation slam with Mariette Shamda and Edwige Dro next week. All of these events have been gratefully funded by the ESRC's Impact Acceleration account and the University of Bristol. They are part of a series of events marking 10 years of Bakwa that are spanning 3 continents and all sorts of places. So again, thank you all. Please come to our next events. Follow everyone on Twitter. I put in some of the websites. You can follow Bakwa on Twitter. You can follow Mawazo Books on Twitter. You can follow Doreen on Twitter. You can follow Dzekashu on Twitter. You can follow Nfor on Twitter. Don't follow me on Twitter. But you know, you'll see all the other things we're doing. We have plans. We have plans in the pipeline. We have projects afoot, and we'd love for you to stay a part of the conversation. So enjoy your weekends, everybody. And thank you again for Dzekashu and Doreen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Doreen.